Welcome, and thank you for being part of the 2021 National Farmers Union Legislative Virtual Fly-In. We had planned and hoped for you all to be joining us here in Washington, D.C., but circumstances prevented us from joining together in person. Over the years, the fly-in has become an important part of the NFU calendar as members from across the country join in the common fight in effort to share our views and our stories with our elected officials. Very glad that despite our distance, we can still work together to be advocates for change. We also know this is a busy time on all of our farm and ranch operations, and that we can make the best use of technology, assuming it cooperates, to be flexible and join us in these important conversations from wherever you are. It means a lot to us that you've taken the time out of your schedules to participate. With all the challenges we face in our communities today, in our economy, in our country as a whole, these conversations are especially important. By sharing your experiences from the farm, you can help build better policies that ensure the competitiveness of our markets, the health of our environment, and the vitality of our rural communities. At this point, let me give you a quick overview of what the agenda will be. On Monday through Thursday of next week, September 20th through the 23rd, we will have congressional office meetings. These have been set up through your state Farmers Union division or through National Farmers Union. On Tuesday, September 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, there will be the USDA and administration briefing. We'll hear from key leaders from the Department of Agriculture and from other parts of the federal government. On Wednesday, September 22nd, also at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we will hold our Fairness for Farmers event. It's a public launch of a campaign by National Farmers Union to make sure that decision makers know that we all suffer, farmers, ranchers, rural communities, and consumers, when our food system isn't competitive. And on Thursday, September 23rd, at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll have our wrap-up event. This is a time for some fun and fellowship as we reflect back on a productive week of online advocacy. For the rest of this session, you'll hear and learn more about technical training and techniques for making these congressional office visits online be most effective. You'll also learn more about the discussion topics and asks that you'll be covering during those congressional meetings. The overall theme of each of these is competitive markets, rural and agricultural infrastructure, and addressing disasters and climate change. National Farmers Union government relations staff will share an overview of our legislative priorities for this year's fly-in. You'll also hear from National Farmers Union Vice President Patty Edelberg, who will share some examples of how fly-ins can make a difference. There will also be plenty of opportunity to ask and receive answers to any questions that you might have. Thank you so much again for your participation.
All right. Hi there, I'm Mike Strands, I'm the Vice President of Advocacy for National Farmers Union, and thank you again for joining in. And as President LaRue noted, for this year's fall legislative virtual fly-in, we have three main points that we'll be tackling during our meetings with congressional offices. And again, those are competitive markets, rural and agricultural infrastructure, and addressing disasters and climate change. We'll go to the next slide here. So I'll talk a bit more about competition in the marketplace and competitive markets. Now, I know we've got always every year at a fly-in, we have a good smattering of experience levels. Some of you have taken part in many fly-ins, some might be on your first. In fact, with virtual advocacy efforts like this, it's sometimes a good way to get in for the first time and to see what it's like to do this. But one point that you've probably seen at fly-ins past is the concentration ratio, what we call it the CR4. In so many markets, so many parts of the agriculture economy, there are so few players that there's not a fair market anymore, and that farmers don't have choices about what they're buying or from whom they're buying and where they're selling the crops and livestock they produce. So the CR4 concentration ratio, it's a figure used by economists to take a look at the top 4 largest firms in each section or sector of the economy. And when the CR4, or the power control, or the control of the top 4 entities in each of those spaces, when that exceeds 40 or 50%, it's practically not a competitive market. And you can see here that for seed corn, the CR4 has gone from just about 60% in 1975 to 85% in 2015. You look at the huge jumps in beef, pork, poultry, soybean seed. There's just not much competition anymore, as we've seen the largest players in our industry get larger and larger. And it's not just on these important markets either. We see this in our communities with retail outlets. We see it in choices in online options and connectivity so that we can be part of today's digital world. There's just few players there. This sort of lack of competition is really hurting our communities, hurting family farmers and ranchers, and hurting consumers. So we're going to take a deep dive into this in the competitive markets section of our topics. You can take another jump here on the slides. Just last week, Secretary Vilsack and at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and some lead staff at the White House just really reiterated this point. You can see Secretary Vilsack's quote: "Because there's so much consolidation, there's very little cash transaction that takes place in this market. And it's so very difficult to determine whether or not the prices that are being paid to farmers are fair." In this case, the Secretary is talking about livestock markets and how there are so few players and so few open trades that we don't know the true price in livestock markets. We've done a lot of work on this as Farmers Union in the 120 years we've been around, but even in the last 2 months, Farmers Union has led on this by testifying during some hearings on Capitol Hill, by endorsing some of the efforts that the Biden administration has taken upon itself to tackle and explore competition in the marketplace. There's a lot of momentum, and I think that's encapsulated well by what Secretary Vilsack said just last week. Go to the next slide, please. So a lot of these claims that we've made, that there's not a lot of competition in the marketplace, aren't just claims. They're backed up by legal decisions and rulings in the judicial branch about fairness issues. This is just one example. So Tyson Foods, one of the biggest poultry integrators and meat processors in the country, one of those top 4, just in the last couple of years, Tyson alone has been charged nearly $222 million through price fixing cases and lawsuits that have been brought forward by poultry farmers. These independent poultry farmers have claimed that Tyson suppresses their market choices and uses its market power unfairly to push down the prices that they receive as poultry growers, and also hurts the overall state of the farm economy. That's just one company. There's others. And we see hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements happening. This is just further evidence of something we already know, and that's there's not enough choice and competition in our marketplace. Take another slide here. So we're going to have to say in each of these sections, we'll provide some background on what's happening, some interesting statistics that are really eye-catching. And then as you're making these meetings with members of Congress, you'll give them something to do about it. And here's the section: what Congress can do for competitive markets. There's 3 bills that we've identified that are really important for pushing along antitrust and competition issues. 2 of them, Senate Bill 949 and Senate Bill 543, are both designed to make the cattle and livestock markets more open and transparent so that it's a fair situation and that the few market players that are out there aren't able to unfairly use their power. The 5014 bill brought forward by Senators Chuck Grassley of Iowa and John Tester of Montana would require meat processors to purchase half of the cattle that they buy on the open market, and it has to be delivered within 14 days of that agreement. The cattle market transparency bill brought forward by Senator Wyden of Oregon and Senator Fisher of Nebraska would bring about more transparency and accountability with cash trading minimums for livestock, and would also provide more market information through contract libraries so that you kind of get an understanding of what you're in for if you're signing up for a contract with a processor. And finally, Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota has been a champion on Senate Bill 225, the Competition and Antitrust Law Enforcement Reform Act, which will put more teeth into the protections that the Department of Justice can provide for farmers. In fact, Senator Klobuchar has written a book entitled Antitrust, After All, and has really put a lot of emphasis on this in the last couple of years and just even in the last few months. One more slide on what Congress can do. In a few weeks, the livestock mandatory reporting legislation will expire. This provides a very important openness and transparency on what the cattle markets are doing. This needs to be extended and soon. And if it lapses at the end of September, it will jeopardize a lot of our markets. Like I noted before with the Klobuchar bill on antitrust, we also need to encourage the Department of Justice to push for more antitrust investigations. They already have the authority, they just need more emphasis on doing that, and Congress can help provide it. And then last of all, the Packers and Stockyards Act is soon to be revisited by USDA with some rulemakings to help make enforcement of the Packers and Stockyards Act more helpful for farmers and ranchers. And we want Congress to allow that to move forward and to give it the boost that it may need. So with that, I've gone through the competitive market section of the presentation. Next, I'll call upon Leila Soberanis, NFU Senior Government Relations Representative, for talk about infrastructure. Leila.
Thanks, Mike. As Mike mentioned, I am Leila Soberanis, and I am Senior Government Relations Representative for NFU. As you prepare for your virtual flying meetings, depending on where you are geographically located, you may have already made plans to ensure that you have internet access for your scheduled meetings. The need for rural and agricultural infrastructure for rural America has been for a very long time present. It has been made even more evident since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, as all aspects of life have transitioned online. As you view this presentation and conduct your meetings via your screens, the need for broadband expansion has never been greater. And there's no greater way of demonstrating this to Congress than actually putting that in front of them like this. So for farmers and ranchers, they rely not only on internet access, but also highways, bridges, and railways and waterways that have brought their products to market. And with the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, it has made it even more evident as they have to drive longer distances to stay in business. Currently, Congress is on the cusp of passing the largest infrastructure deal, along with a $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation bill. On August 10th, the Senate passed what is known as the Invest in America Act, with a total price tag of $1.2 trillion, $550 billion in new investment. As you can see on your screen, the main areas of spending are in transportation, utilities, and pollution cleanup. The largest portion, transportation, as seen on the graph, invests $110 billion in roads, bridges, and major projects, followed by the railways, power grid infrastructure. For the utilities portion, it makes $65 billion in a $65 billion investment in broadband, a rollout of high-speed internet, and a new access for low-income families. Not included in the graph is the $21 billion that will go to pollution cleanup of abandoned mines. So next slide, please. Closing the digital divide. It is a term you will probably be hearing a lot of if you have not already. The term refers to the gap between demographics and regions that have access to information and communications technology and those that do not. So for example, urban versus rural. Approximately 21 million Americans still lack access to broadband, and in rural areas, that's 30% that lack access to internet. The FCC calculates that this is nearly a quarter of the population. According to USDA, 1 in 4 farmers still lack access to broadband, And additionally, the USDA also estimates that broadband-enabled precision technology could add more than 18 billion to agriculture's total economic impact. The bill aims to close the digital divide with provisions that end digital redlining and will help low-income families have more access and afford access to internet. It also provides extra funding for USDA programs for broadband service facilities in rural areas and creates a new grant programs that will help deploy the actual infrastructure of the broadband. Slide 3, please. So according to the White House, 1 in 5 miles or 173,000 total miles of our highways are more than 45,000 bridges are in poor condition, with the average age of a bridge being 60 years. It just makes you think, how many of the bridges in our country need repair? 45,000 is a lot. Included in the bill is a portion, in addition to the transportation portion, is the Haulers of Agriculture and Livestock Safety Act, also known as the HALS Act. If you have not heard of it already, I'm sure you have experienced the ramifications of hours of service regulations throughout the pandemic. If you are a truck driver, if you drive your product across state lines. The HALS Act, which is included in this infrastructure bill, and if it passes, provides agricultural and livestock haulers the regulatory flexibility in hours that they need to deliver their product to market, which the pandemic has shown that folks have had to drive longer distances to stay in business. Last year alone, the United States faced 22 extreme weather and climate-related disaster events, with the loss exceeding 1 billion each. So a cumulative price tag of nearly 100 billion. The bill largely invests in climate resiliency efforts of physical natural systems. NFU is advocating for USDA and RCS funding and key watershed programs that fund agricultural waste management, water quality, and flood prevention projects, which stand to get an infusion of 918 million in investment. Slide 4, please. So what can Congress do? The huge infrastructure bill, HR 3684, Investment in America Act, needs to pass in order for all these investments to actually occur. So our message is to oppose changes that could threaten passage. As you have conversations, share your examples of what this investment in infrastructure actually means for you and your community. They need to know the urgency of how this impacts you, and they need to know that any changes that could threaten it will impact this large investment that could change countless lives. So with that, I would like to introduce my colleague, Erin, who will talk about disasters and climate change.
Layla, thanks so much. I'm Aaron Shire. I'm also a senior government relations representative at National Farmers Union. And as Layla mentioned, I'm here to discuss natural disasters and climate change. So extreme weather events and natural disasters affect farming operations every year, as you well know. And this year has been particularly rough, with drought conditions across much of the Western US leading to significant losses of crops and livestock. And climate change is exacerbating the current difficult conditions through rising average temperatures, more severe storms, precipitation extremes, and increased risks of wildfires. And without action, these problems are expected to get worse. Next slide, please. So fortunately, family farmers and ranchers hold great power to address this crisis, and many are already doing so by implementing conservation practices on their land and producing renewable energy. But farmers and ranchers need support, financial and technical assistance, new market opportunities, and pragmatic policy solutions to address these challenges. So thankfully, the issue of climate change is also getting the attention it deserves from the current administration and Congress, as you can see on this slide. In January earlier this year, President Biden issued an executive order on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And that highlighted the important role farmers and ranchers can play in tackling climate change. USDA is continuing to develop and implement its strategy for climate smart agriculture, which includes a focus on partnerships, research, and creating new streams of income for farmers and ranchers. And Congress is taking action by introducing bills such as the Growing Climate Solutions Act, the Next Generation Fuels Act, and by committing to investing in climate smart agriculture and rural resiliency through ongoing infrastructure negotiations, which we'll talk more about on the next slide. So the next slide, please. So yeah, what can you ask Congress to do about these challenges? There are many policy solutions you can discuss with your members of Congress and their staff during fly-in, and I'll run down a couple here. First, as farmers everywhere continue to face more extreme weather due to climate change, it's critical that USDA disaster assistance programs can effectively respond. And with that in mind, you can ask Congress to extend the programs including WIP Plus, the Wildfire and Hurricane Indemnity Program Plus program, and also improve and make permanent two other programs, the Livestock Forage Program, or LFP, and the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, or ELAP. So that's the first bullet here. Next, you can urge Congress to support more investment in USDA programs that help combat climate change. Those programs include the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP. The problem is these programs are historically oversubscribed, and far more farmers want to use them than are able to each year, in part due to insufficient funds. So you can tell Congress to ensure these programs have the funding they need, including through the ongoing budget reconciliation process, so that we're not missing opportunities for farmers to implement land stewardship practices that could work on their operations and on your farms and operations. Next bullet, it's also important for Congress to enact the Growing Climate Solutions Act. It's a bipartisan bill that would make it easier for farmers and ranchers to participate in carbon and in other environmental credit markets. And as these markets continue to develop, farmers need assurances that programs that facilitate participation in these markets are credible and effective. And the Growing Climate Solutions Act would help with just that. The bill has already passed the Senate by an overwhelming margin of 92-8, but it faces some headwinds in the House. So ask members of the House to back this bill today, and thank members of the Senate who supported this bill and got it across the finish line. And finally, the final bullet here, ask members of Congress to address the Next Generation Fuels Act, to enact it. This bipartisan bill as well was introduced by Representative Bustos from Illinois, and it would help clean up our nation's gasoline supply and transition light duty vehicles to low carbon, high octane fuels. This would help reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve air quality, and increase fuel efficiency. With low carbon, high octane fuel, automakers will be able to use advanced engine design features that improve vehicle fuel efficiency by 5 to 7% and support higher fuel economy standards. And for farmers in rural communities, a low carbon, high octane fuel standard supports biofuel demand and enables biofuels to be a greater part of the solution to decarbonize transportation. So again, ask your members of Congress to support the Next Generation Fuels Act. And with that, I've completed my portion here of the presentation, and I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Sarah.
Hey there. I assume y'all can hear me. Sorry, I wasn't sure if I was on camera yet. So I hope that's working and you could see my face as well. Thanks, Aaron, for passing it over to me. My name is Sarah Nagu-Reed, and I'm the newest member of the Government Relations team here in DC. Before I provide an Advocacy 101 overview today, our team would like to conduct 2 polls to help us understand your level of engagement in the advocacy space. Okay, so we would first like to ask, have you met with a member of Congress or congressional staff before? There should be a prompt that just popped up on your screen. So if you could just select one of those answers, that would be greatly appreciated. Great. Wow. Okay. An overwhelming number of you have. So we have some experience here. Wonderful. Okay. So for our second question, have you participated in an NFU fly-in before? Okay, a good mix. All right, all right. Okay, thanks for filling out those polls. All right, let's get to it. So fly-ins really provide us with an opportunity to share our story and advocate on behalf of the issues impacting farmers at the grassroots level, yourself included, but all of the NFU members. So why is advocacy important? Because members of Congress want to hear from you, not us all the time. They want to hear your story and value your insight. They want to understand how they can resolve the issues you're facing, like the ramifications that come with consolidation in ag, or the infrastructure needs in your specific community. This helps guide them in deciding to support bills that will help you write, like some of my bills that some of my colleagues mentioned, or give them ideas on writing their own bills that is based on the insight you share with them in the meeting and further discussions after those meetings. Harry, can you go to the next slide? But before we meet with those offices, let's discuss how to prep for the meetings. So based on the polling results that you all just filled out, it seems a number of you have been in a meeting. So we have some veterans here amongst us, but just as a refresher, I'm going to kind of walk through some items that might help you. First off, you definitely want to coordinate with your team members. So you're organized and prepared to facilitate a great conversation with the congressional office. Members of Congress and their staff are extremely busy, so we have a limited amount of time and we want to squeeze in as much as we can into that limited amount of time. I cannot stress this next point enough. Review the lawmakers you'll be meeting with and their background. Important information to look for while you're prepping with your team or before you go into this virtual meeting or the virtual meetings you have with these lawmakers. Where is their congressional district? Is it in a more urban or rural area? Are you their constituent? What party are they affiliated with? How long have they been serving? What committees do they sit on? This one's very important too, as it relates to a lot of our top priorities that we will be advocating on behalf of. And then also amongst your group and your team that you're going to be in the meeting with, review any connections any of you have to that office. So perhaps none of you are constituents, but maybe you have an uncle there, or maybe you visited there. It's good to flag items like that for the office so that they're aware that there is a connection and tie. Determine in advance who will be the main speaker at each meeting based on that tie-in or connection to the district. And that individual, will be able to kind of close any sort of gaps so there's no awkward silences and guide the conversation. But of course, you may have GR staff present too, so we're happy to assist in moving the conversation along. You want to practice your presentations to the extent you can. One way to go into the meeting is to become a little organized by having some sort of schedule or agenda. So introduce yourself, kind of go in a round robin, briefly describe your farm operation, what commodities you produce, explain how one or more of the fly-in issues affect you and why the lawmakers should act. And that's kind of where the committee assignments also fit into your conversation, to understand if someone sits on House SAG or Senate Judiciary, and the tie-in with the consolidation issue or the other issues we're discussing pertaining to that committee. This also provides you with some form of structure and planning for the virtual meetings. So as I mentioned, you're avoiding having dead space in a group call. Be concise and do not get too bogged down into the details. If you don't know an answer, don't make one up. Simply rely on the GR staff on the call, or say, I will get you an answer to that after our meeting. Next slide, please. During the meetings, be on time. In fact, log into the Zoom a couple minutes before the start time, just so that we're prepared and we're not having to wait on individuals or bringing them into the meeting after the member of Congress or the staff are there. And then you also want to be polite and let folks take their turn speaking. I know in a virtual setting, sometimes that's difficult in trying to capture when someone is closing out their comments, but to the extent you can, give them a few seconds before you start speaking up. Be mindful to place yourself on mute. And I know many of us are probably accustomed to Zoom by now. So we've become veterans in that, but just, always be mindful of that so that we don't have any background noise. And very important, ask questions. Come prepared with questions. And also tell your story to be effective. Think of a few examples you can tie into the priority issues our team outlined earlier in this training session. Use your time wisely, stay on task, stay on message. And at the end, if it makes sense and your operation is nearby or you have a tie into that district, invite them out to your farming operation. After the meetings, send thank you cards and follow-up emails. And then Harry, if you could go to the next slide, please fill out your gold sheet form links. So here's an example of what that will look like. This will be sent to you after the meetings. This is really important for our GR team and shop that will be able to digest the information you provide and follow up with offices after based on those responses and their level of interest in the issues. And lastly, have fun. This is exciting. It's an opportunity to advocate not only on behalf of your farming operation, but all of NFU's members. Okay, thank you. I think we're sending this off to Rob now.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks to the NFU GR team. Mike here, jumping in for a moment. And just again, if you have any questions about materials and where to find them for the fly-in, whether it's the talking points document that the NFU staff just went through, whether it's the gold sheets, those will be posted as well, whether it's the nifty backgrounds we've got. This one makes me look like I'm a grasshopper or something. I think it's kind of nice, but all those will be available and are available at nfu.org/fly-in. We'll have that in the chat here in a moment or two. So next, we'll go to NFU Vice President Patty Edelberg for some stories on how fly-in has helped in the past. Hi, Patty.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you everybody for joining us on this technical issues briefing, hoping we're all getting ready for next week. But my name is Patty Edelberg. I'm a dairy farmer from central Wisconsin. And I am the Vice President for the National Farmers Union. And this will be close to my 28th. So this will be, I haven't gone every year, but there was a couple of years where there was, I'm having issues, it looks like, on my computer. But anyway, this is my 25th year, possibly going to the NFU fly-in. And I just wanted to let you know that it's very important for all of us, for all of you, to engage with our members of Congress and their staff during lobby days like the NFU virtual fly-in. We all know that it is very important to have representation in Washington, and not just from our elected officials, but from our organization as well. The NFU government relations team serves as our everyday boots on the ground, but ultimately, sorry, I'm reading Mike's message here because I can't, my video obviously isn't working for some reason. But ultimately, lobbying and advocacy is for all of us. And that's because telling personal stories and helping lawmakers and their staff understand our everyday, day-to-day realities has a huge impact. I remember going to a fly-in one year when we were talking about new Farm Bill issues. And one of the issues that year was the disaster programs and trying to get disaster programs in the Farm Bill. Sitting in the office, we were talking to Congressman and his staff and other Farmers Union members. We're talking about how important disaster programs are for us here on our farms and ranches. You could really see the impact we were making in that office by telling our hands in the dirt stories about feed losses due to drought or cattle losses due to severe storms, and what we were losing financially, or how without a disaster program, some of these farmers were forced to sell their farms or their animals. So those personal stories really make a huge impact, especially for those individuals that don't necessarily come from districts that have a lot of rural constituents. I remember sitting in a meeting in Georgia, the congressman from Georgia, and we were talking about a new Farm Bill, of course, again. And this congressman had a very urban district, and he literally asked us for stories on how we were being impacted on different things that the Farm Bill was going to be able to offer. So it was very important for us to be able to tell those stories, because he didn't know, his constituents couldn't go back and tell him how farmers were being impacted. So ultimately, the strength of the National Farmers Union is in our members, in all of you. And when you visit with our members and their staff, you help build the Farmers Union brand and deepen our relationships with those offices. This yields dividends down the road for family farmers and ranchers. And I'm always amazed how many of these legislators remember our names or our faces, or even just NFU members that NFU members have been there in the past. Every time we walked into Senator Ron Kine's office, I remember he would sit down and shake hands with all of us, ask about our farms, our hometowns, or even how Aunt Sally was doing. My point is, when we tell our impactful stories and how we are affected by these issues, they really do remember them. So I'm really glad you've all joined us for the 2021 NFU virtual fly-in, and for making sure that your voice, the Farmers Union voice, is heard on Capitol Hill. Thank you all.
Thanks, Patty. And yeah, echoing that. Thanks everyone on the Zoom here for joining in for this discussion. As promised, we've been getting some questions coming in, and we'll do our best to answer them. Now, of course, these questions can be about the topics. So we've got the government relations staff ready to jump in with that. If you have technical questions about how to navigate the various platforms you might be using, whether it's Zoom or Teams or WebEx or conference call or whatever the latest and greatest is that members of Congress and their staff are using to connect with you, we can help with that as well. We would also remind you to be in touch with your state farmers union staff and leadership who have been coordinating the bulk of the meetings, which has been extremely helpful, and it's kind of a departure from fly-ins past, but it's a good way to keep things flexible and moving forward on this. So be in touch with them. They can help connect you with the resources that you need. And also, don't forget, if you found this discussion to be enlightening and you'd like to come back to it to see how the various issues work out, or if you wanted to share it with some of your friends and fellow Farmers Union members, this will be posted on the NFU fly-in webpage by day's end, I expect. So keep an eye out for that. So with that in mind, I'm going to take a look over at question bank as some have come in here, and I see on the Q&A document here. Let's see. So question here for probably go to Layla on this one here in a second. Layla handles infrastructure issues and rural connectivity, but I've got a question, Layla, that's come in about Starlink, one of the connectivity technologies out there. Starlink is available in this member's area, but it's really expensive, and it's hard to keep waiting for fiber optic cables to arrive. CenturyLink has gotten a lot of money in grants through different infrastructure efforts, but hasn't made a difference yet in this particular area. So do you know if there's any payment considerations out there for helping people get access to Starlink, for example?
Yes, thank you for the question. So with the new infrastructure package, there is a new program that is made permanent. It is called the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program, and it now requires that all services provide affordability. So I believe that right now there is a monthly discount of $50 a month, and so it makes it permanent across the board. In terms of the question of who you should be asking as you have these meetings, I would suggest you ask them to elaborate on how specifically this applies to your state. Once the package actually passes, what is the timeline for this to actually reach consumers like you?
Great, thanks for that, Layla. So one of the things that I mentioned here is that the bulk of the meetings that you've had set up with your states have been about with members of Congress in your state's delegation. But NFU has also set up some meetings with key members of committees on Capitol Hill. One of those is the Appropriations Committee. The Appropriations Committee, of course, controls how much money is directed to programs and legislation that can get assistance for, say, broadband or farm disaster programs, a whole host of issues, including climate. A question came in if there's anything in particular we should be ready for when talking to members of the Appropriations Committee. I think that gets back to something that Sarah mentioned earlier in preparations for meetings. Be sure to look at a little more background about where those members of Congress sit on committees. If they're a member of the Appropriations Committee, they may have the opportunity to lead some important discussions on funding. Some of these members are on the Judiciary Committees and have been doing some investigations into competition and antitrust issues. So keep an eye out for those. Your state staff that are coordinating the meetings can help you out with that. NFU staff has been providing them with pointers on which committee each member of Congress sits on that you'll be meeting with. So keep an eye out for that. Let's see, looking around here. So here's a question that's come in. My urban farmer friends need support as well to grow and develop a sustainable business. While they begin to do so, they are looking for NFU support for their portion of the business side of producing food. Are there issues based on USDA inclusiveness for loans and price supports? And how does that work in combination with NFU policy? So I guess this is a question I'm going to turn largely to Aaron Shire here. And Aaron covers a lot of specialty crop issues for us. Are there any particular specialty crop ties you see in the fly-in topics that we've talked about here? And how can we help advocate for farmers, specialty crops or in urban agriculture?
Thanks very much for the question. And, I think on the urban agriculture side of things, what's really exciting is that from the last Farm Bill, we have a new Office of Urban Agriculture, which is in the process of being stood up over at USDA. And there are opportunities to better fund that office and also some grant programs and other things in the urban agriculture space. So I think that there are opportunities to raise those particular sort of interests during fly-in, sharing how, what your operation is like as, as an urban farmer, that an Office of Urban Ag is important for elevating the issue at USDA and helping make the kind of connections that you need to get access to those sorts of resources like grants and loans to help better your business.
Thanks for that, Aaron. Yeah, glad to hear we can build that into the discussion as well. Another topic that has come up a few times here is what's the status of the Farm Bill and what should we be talking about with the Farm Bill? So just quickly on that, the Farm Bill, of course, is the once every 5-year omnibus legislation that handles pretty much anything related to farming, to ranching, to conservation, rural development, crop insurance, horticulture, research, the food system in general. The Farm Bill is a big piece of legislation, but most recently was passed and signed into law in late 2018. So according to the 5-year schedule of the Farm Bill, we're looking at a 2023 reauthorization or reconsideration of the Farm Bill. So we're kind of at a point in time where Congress is just starting to get more ideas about what needs to be in the 2023 Farm Bill. In fact, just this morning, the Senate Agriculture Committee had a hearing on dairy pricing, and that is in part of their preparation to be ready for Farm Bill discussions in the coming couple of years. So what we're doing this year with Fly-In is to focus on competition issues, that market competitiveness topic, to highlight some of the infrastructure needs, which are oftentimes touched on by the Farm Bill, and also to emphasize climate as a real priority. I think all three of these things are topics that should be kept in mind for the next Farm Bill, whether it's having some sort of considerations for competitive markets in the next Farm Bill, whether it's having more emphasis in climate and conservation in the next Farm Bill, or whether it's about emphasizing rural development and investment in our communities. That can also be part of the Farm Bill. So while it's not said specifically that the 3 points we're talking about during Fly-In this year are about the Farm Bill, it lays the foundation for a conversation about that in the coming years. Hope that was helpful. And thanks for all those questions about the Farm Bill. We always love to talk about it and try to elevate that. So as was mentioned before, materials that we talked about here are all available on our Fly-In website. I dropped it in the chat here again. The Zoom, of course, has been recorded. It will be posted on nfu.org/Fly-In. The talking points document, the agenda, these snazzy Zoom backgrounds are also available there. So too will be the gold sheets, the backgrounders on, or the documents that'll help you provide feedback on how your meetings went. So with that, I think we are just about out of questions here. It's been great to have such good participation from everybody. Thanks for the supportive chats and Q&A throughout all this. And we look forward to seeing you in meetings on Monday, and then also at our USDA briefing that will be hosted at 1 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday, September 21st. Take a look on the agendas for the link to register for that event. And we look forward to seeing you then. Again, ask us some questions. We'll be here to help over the next few days. But again, welcome to the 2021 virtual Fly-In, and let's make it a good one. Thanks, everybody.